You ever buy a game, like actually buy it? Go to the store or it shows up in the mail. You crack open the plastic, pop the disc in, and your console goes, downloading update 47 gigabytes. 47 gigabytes. At that point, the disc isn't a game, it's a suggestion. It's like the box is saying, hey man, thanks for stopping by. The real thing will be ready in about an hour. Well, depending on how good your internet connectivity is. And you know what the wild part is? We don't even get mad anymore. We just go, yeah, that makes sense. At some point, that became normal. Not annoying, not embarrassing, just all part of the process. And that's what's got me thinking. Because there was a time when you bought a game and whatever it was going to be, it already was. No crossed fingers, no roadmaps, no, come on, just give it a few patches. You hit start, and that was the deal. So today, I want to talk about when that changed. Not to rant, and not to romanticize the past. Just to ask a simple question. When did launch stop meaning complete? Hey, and welcome to, or welcome back to, the Average Joe Nerdcast. I'm Nate, your resident Average Joe. And today's episode is one of those where I didn't realize how much something bothered me until I actually stopped and thought about it. Because there was a time when buying a video game meant you were getting the whole thing. Not perfect, not flawless, but finished. And somewhere along the way, that expectation quietly changed, and most of us just rolled right along with it. So today, we're talking about when games felt finished, and how we ended up accepting that we'll fix it later became part of the deal. So pop in that memory card, grab a controller, and let's get comfortable. We're going to talk about it. All right, before anyone fires off the "okay, Grandpa" comments, yes, I know. Games were always buggy. Games were always weird. Games were always held together with duct tape and prayers. I'm not pretending everything used to be perfect. But here's the thing. There's a difference between a game being a little janky and a game being unfinished. And we used to know the difference instinctively. Launch day used to feel final. Not final like no more updates ever. Final like this is the version they're standing behind. You didn't buy a game wondering what it might become. You bought it for exactly what it was. And if it ruled, fucking awesome. If it sucked, well, you were kind of stuck with it. Which, to be fair, does sound brutal. But it also meant something important. They had to get it right before selling it to you. And don't get me wrong, older games had their fair share of bugs. Everyone knows that. But they didn't ship missing half the experience. You weren't sitting there going, oh yeah, the inventory system is coming in Season 2. Or, they're adding basic features in a future update. What you got was the whole thing. Flaws and all. And that distinction matters more than people realize. Because bugs are accidents. Missing systems are decisions. And yeah, I'm gonna say the word. Game manuals. Relax, I'm not doing a TED Talk about booklets. But manuals were proof of something. They were proof that someone sat down and said, okay, this is the version of the game people are getting. Controls locked. Systems locked. Vision locked. Not, well, we'll just explain it later. Not, well, we'll patch it in. Just, this is it. That's all they represented. Not magic, not nostalgia. Intent. Okay, manual rant over. I promise. So here's the real difference. On launch day back then, you weren't hoping. You weren't hoping performance was okay. You weren't hoping systems worked. You weren't hoping the servers held. You were playing. And that confidence is the thing we've lost. Not graphics, not ambition, just confidence. And it didn't disappear overnight. This was not a sudden collapse. No one suddenly woke up and said, "All right, gamers, from now on, we ship vibes." It slipped quietly, one patch at a time. And the first few times, it made sense. The first time someone said, "Yeah, just let it update," we all went, "Sure thing," because it was reasonable. Games got bigger, hardware got more and more complex, and the internet got faster. No red flags just yet, but that phrase, that was the first crack. Because once waiting becomes part of playing, launch stops being the finish line. And that's where things start getting just a little weird. Because once upon a time, if a game needed a patch on day one, that was kind of embarrassing. Not cancel the studio embarrassing, but definitely, embarrassing. Like, yeah, the game's great, but there's a patch you need. That used to be said quietly. Day one patches used to feel almost like apologies. Because early on, patches kind of felt like, "Hey, sorry about this, here's a quick fix." And players went, "Cool, we appreciate that." No drama, because the assumption was still the disc version should mostly work. The patch was just polish. At some point, though, the excuse showed up. "Well, every game has a day one patch nowadays," and you're just like, "Well, yeah, that's true." And that's the moment the pressure disappeared. Because once everyone does something, it stops feeling like a mistake and starts feeling like a rule of thumb. No shame, no side eye, just acceptance. And here's the wild part. Patches didn't just get more common. They got bigger and bigger and bigger. Gigabytes, dozens of gigabytes, sometimes bigger than what was on the disk. And we didn't riot. We didn't revolt. We just adjusted. We went from, "Oh, wow, that's annoying," to, "Yeah, let it update overnight. We'll play tomorrow." That is a massive behavioral shift, and it happened very quietly. Just don't play it until it updates. Think about how insane that sentence actually is. You've already bought the game. You physically own the thing. And the advice is, yeah, don't play it just yet. Not because you're busy, and not because you want to savor it. Because it's not ready. And we say that casually now, like it's completely normal. This is the real shift. Launch day used to be, "Here it is." Now it's, "Here's the starting point." And the expectation quietly changed from, "They better nail this," to, "This'll get there." Which sounds generous, but it also lets a lot slide. And reviews changed too. And that kind of matters. Because have you ever noticed how reviews talk now? It's not, "Is this good?" It's, "Is this a good foundation?" That's not how finished products are evaluated. That's how projects are evaluated. And I get why reviewers do it. Don't get me wrong. Nobody wants to dunk on something that might be great in 6 months. But that mindset has consequences. Because once reviews start grading potential instead of reality, launch quality stops being the priority. And marketing learned how to spin it. This is where the language really starts doing damage. Broken systems aren't quote unquote broken anymore. They're being addressed. Missing features aren't missing, they're on the roadmap. Rough launches aren't failures. They're listening to feedback. Everything sounds positive, even when the product is not finished. And here's the part nobody likes admitting. We helped normalize it. Not because we're stupid, that's not what I'm saying. And it definitely isn't because we don't care, but because convenience is powerful. Fast internet, background updates, always online consoles. Waiting stopped feeling painful, so we stopped pushing back. Ask yourself this honestly. When a game launches busted now, are you even surprised? Or do you just sigh and go, yeah, figures? That's the tell. Surprise means expectations. Resignation means conditioning. And most of us, we are conditioned. And nobody announced this change. We were trained into it, patch by patch, launch by launch, excuse by excuse, until unfinished stopped being a red flag and started being a phase. And once unfinished became a phase, the next step was inevitable, because if games don't need to be finished at launch, why not let players help finish them? Why not turn launch into the first round of testing? That's when things really changed. Because the next logical step was, cool, let's just figure this out together. Betas used to mean something very specific. There used to be a very clear line. A beta meant, this is not the final game. This might be broken. You're here to help test it. And that was completely fine. It was honest. You didn't pay full price. You didn't expect polish. You were just opting in. And that distinction mattered. Then, betas turned into hype machines. At some point, betas stopped being just tests and started being marketing themselves. Early access weekends, influencer previews, countdowns. Suddenly, betas weren't about, does this work? They were about, look how fun this already is. And if the beta is selling confidence instead of finding problems, it's not really a beta anymore, is it? It's just a demo with plausible deniability. And early access is where things really started to blur. Because early access is technically honest. It tells you this is not a finished product. But it also asks you to pay anyway. And once players get comfortable paying for unfinished games, even voluntarily, that expectation doesn't stay contained. It leaks. Suddenly, unfinished doesn't feel like a deal breaker anymore. It feels like a phase. And you've probably heard this phrase. Hell, you've probably said it. It'll be good eventually. That's not optimism. That's copium. That's how you justify spending money on something that did not deliver yet. And once that phrase becomes normal, so does the disappointment. And here's the part that sounds boring, but it really isn't. Modern games collect everything. Where you die, what weapons you use, what you ignore, and when you quit. That data is insanely valuable, but it also means the biggest, most important testing phase happens after launch with paying customers. We didn't just become players, we became data points. I mean, seriously, think about how you approach games now. Do you actually learn systems deeply, or do you just go, this'll probably get nerfed? Why invest emotionally in something that might be rewritten next patch? That uncertainty kills commitment. You stop mastering games, you stop trusting mechanics, you hedge, and hedging is not fun. So live feedback replaces confidence. And this is where another shift happens. Instead of developers saying this is how it works, they instead say, we'll see how players react, which sounds collaborative, but often leads to design by committee. Systems feel tentative. Identities feel muddy. Nothing ever feels locked, because nothing is locked. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We did not just accept this shift. We openly participated in it. We gave feedback. We reported bugs. We debated balance. We stuck around waiting for fixes. And trust me, none of that is wrong. But it did something important. It shifted responsibility from they shipped it like this to we're helping them fix it. And that is a huge psychological change. And then launch stopped being delivery, and instead it became an almost negotiation. Because this is the moment the contract really changed. Launch isn't, here's the game, it's, let's start the conversation. And conversations do not end, they just evolve, which is great for communities, but terrible for accountability. This is why players sound tired nowadays. Not angry and not shocked, just tired. You load in, you notice problems, you shrug, then you wait. That's learned behavior, and it's the exact opposite of excitement. So at this point, we have established something important. Games didn't just start launching unfinished by accident. The system evolved to support it. Players adapted to it, and eventually, the mask came off. Because once unfinished launches stopped being risky, some games stopped trying to be finished at all. So let's do a quick case study. Cyberpunk 2077 was not sold like a normal game. It was sold like a statement. Years of trailers, gameplay demos, deep dives, developer interviews. The message wasn't, hey, this might get there eventually. The message was, this is it. A finished, story-driven, single-player experience. No seasons, no live service hand-waving, just, we made something special. And people bought into it. Because the studio had earned that trust before. And that is important. This was not blind hype. This was goodwill. And then launch day hit. And within hours, you could feel it, not just online, but emotionally. Something was incredibly off. PC players were saying, yeah, it's rough, but it's playable. Console players were saying, what in the fuck is this? And here's the key detail. Most people had never actually seen the console version before release. Reviews were limited. Footage was controlled. Transparency was, let's just say, thin. So for a lot of players, launch day wasn't disappointment. It was complete shock. And let's be very clear here. This was not, oh wow, some glitches. This was performance collapsing, visuals breaking down, and systems not behaving as advertised. Entire chunks of the experience simply did not function the way people were told they would. You could not day one patch your way out of that shit, because the issue was not polish, it was readiness. And normally this is where the internet goes, give it time. They'll fix it. Hey, development is hard. And sure, all three of those things are true. But this time, even the platforms stepped in. Refunds, storefront removals, public statements. That never happens unless something is seriously wrong. That was not gamers overreacting. That was the system saying, okay, this crossed a line. This is where the contract finally snapped, because up until Cyberpunk, you could still pretend unfinished launches were edge cases. After Cyberpunk, you couldn't. This wasn't some niche indie. This wasn't a live service experiment. This was not early access. This was a full-price, story-driven game sold as complete, and it wasn't. So here's the part that gets messy. Yes, the game got better. Yes, patches helped. Yes, time improved everything. But that doesn't erase what happened. Because once players see behind the curtain, they do not forget it. Trust is not something you patch back in. And what sticks with me isn't the anger, it's the reaction after. People didn't say, this can never happen again. They just said, yeah, it figures. That's not rage. That's acceptance. And acceptance is way more dangerous. After Cyberpunk, something changed. Players stopped assuming launch equals finished, reviews equal reliable, big studios equal safe bets. From that point on, every launch had an asterisk. And once expectations drop, they very rarely ever come back up. Cyberpunk 2077 should have been the wake-up call, the moment where the industry said, okay, enough. But that's not what happened. Instead, we learned the wrong lesson, because right after this, another game proved something terrifying, that you can launch unfinished, fix it later, and still be celebrated. And I want to be really careful here, because this is absolutely not a dunk session. What happened with No Man's Sky is genuinely impressive. And that is the problem. When No Man's Sky launched, the promise was huge. An infinite universe, exploration, discovery, player-driven stories. What players got instead was empty, repetitive, shallow in places that were supposed to feel deep. Not broken, not unplayable, just not what people thought they were buying. And the backlash was almost immediate. Refunds, anger, silence from the studio. And for a while, this felt like it might be the cautionary tale. And instead of abandoning the game, they kept working. Quietly, consistently, for years. No battle passes, no paid expansions, no year one DLC roadmap. Just updates. Really big ones. And over time, the game became what people wanted. And this part matters. No Man's Sky today is a wildly different game than it was at launch. Multiplayer, base building, narrative systems, visual overhauls, quality of life improvements. It became something genuinely special, and the developers deserve all the credit for that effort. Full stop. But here's the shift nobody talks about. The conversation around No Man's Sky changed. It went from this shouldn't have shipped like this to look how far it's come. And that sounds positive, but it quietly changes the rules. Because once redemption becomes the headline, launch quality stops being the main issue. And I'm sure you've heard this before. Remember No Man's Sky? It becomes a defense. Anytime a game launches in rough shape, someone always says, yeah, but do you remember No Man's Sky? Meaning, just give it time. They're going to fix it. Just be patient. The exception becomes the justification. Instead of asking, why did this ship unfinished? We start asking, how long until it's good? And that is a massive shift in accountability. This is the dangerous lesson. Players stopped judging games by what they got and started judging them by how hard the developers worked afterward. And empathy, yes, is good, but empathy does not replace consumer standards. Trying really, really hard after launch doesn't undo selling something before it was ready to be sold. And here's another sneaky thing. When a game redeems itself, people stop remembering how bad the launch really was. The pain gets rewritten as part of the journey, and journeys are romantic. But that romantic framing benefits the system, not the player. To me, the industry learned the wrong lesson. The lesson should not have been never ship unfinished. The lesson became, if you stick with it long enough, people will forgive you. That is not restraint. That's risk management. And here's the reason why this one matters a little bit more than Cyberpunk. Because Cyberpunk showed the danger. No Man's Sky showed the escape hatch. It proved that a broken launch doesn't have to be fatal. And once that truth settled in, the idea of a complete launch stopped being sacred. So now I've covered two case studies. One where a launch collapses trust, and one where a launch gets rewritten as a redemption arc, which leaves one last reality to confront, because not every game collapses, and not every game redeems. Some games launch unfinished because they were never meant to be finished in the first place. This is the part where the illusion finally drops. Because up until now, you could still argue, okay, these were mistakes. Ambition got ahead of reality, and stuff just went wrong. Live service games do not even pretend that is the case. This is where unfinished stops being a failure and becomes the entire business model. Traditional games live or die at launch. Live service games do not. They live or die on retention, not is this complete, but are people still logging in? That one shift explains everything. Because if success is measured by time spent instead of experience delivered, completeness becomes completely optional, sometimes even inconvenient. In live service design, launch is not the finish line. It's the minimum viable fun. Just enough content to get players through the door, keep them busy for just a bit, and justify the promise of more. Everything else, maps, modes, systems, quality of life features, they're not missing. They're coming. And coming does a lot of the heavy lifting. When Battlefield 2042 launched, the loudest complaints were not about glitches. They were about what just was not there. Things players had taken for granted: traditional classes, scoreboards, server browsers, core identity features. It did not feel broken. It felt unfinished, like the skeleton of a game that assumed time would just do the rest. And Fallout 76 is even more honest, whether it meant to be or not. At launch, no human NPCs, very thin systems, limited reactivity, and yet it wasn't framed as, this is not ready. It was framed as, this will grow, and that framing matters. Because growth implies incompleteness is normal, expected even. And here's the big difference. In older games, patches fixed mistakes. In live service games, patches are the game. Entire systems arrive later down the road. Foundational mechanics get reworked publicly. And design philosophy changes mid-flight. The version you buy is not the version you play 6 months to a year later. And that's not a problem. It's the point. This is the part players feel but don't always articulate. In live service games, builds change constantly. Metas shift every single season. Content rotates out. Systems get deprecated, so players stop investing deeply. Why master something that might be gone next month? Why commit emotionally when the ground is always moving, so nothing feels permanent anymore? Live service games are never meant to be finished. There is no final version, no definitive state, no moment where you can say, this is the game, which means the old idea of a complete launch simply doesn't apply anymore. And once that mindset takes over the industry, it bleeds into everything else. Even games that aren't live services start launching like they are. So finished becomes a completely meaningless word. And then frustration turns into background noise. Because here's the quietest, saddest shift. Players don't rage quit live service games. They just drift. I'll check back next season. They're fixing it. It'll be better later. Anger dissipates into apathy, and apathy is survivable. And when a game is never done, accountability has nowhere to land. Criticism gets answered with patch notes, community updates, timelines, not solutions, schedules, and schedules can always change. So now we've kind of seen the full arc. Cyberpunk showed what happens when trust collapses. No Man's Sky showed how redemption rewrites memory. And live service shows that unfinished is not accidental anymore. It's structural, intentional, optimized. And this is the moment where you stop talking about games and start talking about us. Because once unfinished becomes the plan, the real question isn't, why do they do this? It's instead, why do we keep paying full price like launch still means complete? So let's pull this out of the weeds for just a second. Because after all the examples, all the systems, all the case studies, this isn't really about patches, or manuals, or live services. It's about a feeling we do not talk about much anymore. We didn't lose quality, we just lost confidence. That's the thing people get wrong. Games didn't suddenly get worse. In a lot of ways, they got better. Bigger worlds, more accessibility options, more post-launch support, even more ambition. What we lost was the confidence that when we buy a game, that's the game. Not a draft, not a foundation, not a promise. The whole thing. Buying a game used to feel like trust. Not blind trust, but reasonable trust. You trusted that the systems were final, the experience was intact, the vision was realized. You weren't hoping, you weren't waiting, you were just playing. That confidence mattered more than we realized. Today, buying a game feels a lot different. You check performance videos, you wait for patch notes, you read "is it fixed yet" threads. That behavior did not come from nowhere. It came from being burned enough times that optimism stopped feeling safe, and when optimism disappears, excitement goes right along with it. And this is where nuance matters. We absolutely gained things. Accessibility updates that should have always existed. Fixes for genuinely broken systems. Improvements that made good games great. That is real value. But we paid for it with permanence. Nothing feels locked anymore. Nothing feels definitive. Nothing feels like the version. And permanence is what lets you commit. Think about how you play video games now. Do you really dig deep into the systems? Or do you just think, this'll probably change? When balance is temporary, when systems are provisional, when content just rotates out, you stop investing emotionally, and you hedge, and hedging kills joy. And this is the emotional tell. Players are not furious all the time. They're just tired. They're cautious, skeptical, waiting. That's not entitlement. That's a learned behavior. That's what happens when trust erodes slowly over years. So let me say this clearly. I do not hate patches. Patches are good. Fixes are good. Ongoing support is good. But what I hate is paying full price for potential. I hate buying a game and being told just give it time. Because time should not be part of the purchase agreement. The biggest loss was not money. It was the feeling of certainty. That feeling of popping something in, hitting start, and knowing this is what they made, flaws and all. That feeling is really rare now. And when something becomes rare, you kind of start to miss it, even if you can't quite explain why. And listen, I don't want to rewind the clock. I don't want fewer updates. And I definitely don't want less ambition or games to stop evolving. I just want honesty. I want launch to mean something again. Because once you see this shift, you really can't unsee it. And the question stops being, why are games like this now? And instead becomes, what should we expect? And what should we stop excusing? That's where we end this. Not angry, just completely clear-eyed. So if you've been nodding along this entire episode, or hell, even arguing with me in your car right now, that's kind of the point. This is not about being right. It's just about being aware. Here's the thing I don't want this episode to turn into: a call to boycott everything, or a rant about how games are dead, or a back in my day speech. That is not helpful. What is helpful is recognizing that we have been trained into certain behaviors. Waiting for patches, avoiding launch week, buying the complete edition later. Those aren't personality traits, they're adaptations. And once you realize that, you start seeing the industry more clearly. I still love video games. Hell, I still get hyped. I still fall for trailers. I still want big, ambitious, weird projects to exist. But I do not pretend launch means what it used to. And that awareness changes things. It changes when you buy, what you expect, what you excuse, and what you let slide. Not out of spite, just out of clarity. And this is important to say. I'm not asking for games to never change. I'm not asking for zero patches. And I'm damn sure not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for honesty. If a game is a live service, just say that. If it's evolving, own it. If launch is the beginning, not the end, price and message it accordingly. Because clarity builds trust, and trust is what's actually missing. That's the line. Launch should just mean this works, this represents our vision, this is something we're proud to sell. Not, just stick with us, wait it out, trust the roadmap. Roadmaps are fine. They just shouldn't be substitutes for readiness. The industry does not respond to outrage. It responds to behavior. When players wait, don't pre-order, ask better questions, and stop excusing everything, standards slowly begin to shift. Not overnight, but they do shift. This episode is not about nostalgia. It's about respect. Respect for your time, your money, your excitement. When games felt finished, it wasn't because developers were better people. It was because the system demanded respect for the moment of sale. That's the thing worth reclaiming. And don't get it twisted. I do not hate modern video games. I just hate feeling like I need a calendar to know when a game is finally ready to enjoy. That's it. That's the whole thesis. So if you made it this far, seriously, thank you. What's the last game you bought that felt complete on day one? Do you even play launch week anymore? What was the first game that made you go, all right, I'm waiting it out next time? Hit me up in the comments or on socials. Just go to Facebook and search Average Joe Nerdcast, and you will find the page. I promise I'll read all of it. So as always, shout out to my player too. And shout out to everyone behind the scenes that keep me pushing forward. And shout out to you for hanging out with me. Until next time, the lobby is always open. Stay gold, nerd bold, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Game over.